Tonight, a major intervention from Britain in the war in Ukraine. For the first time since the war began, Ukraine has fired British-made Storm Shadow missiles into Russia. Escalation on the battlefield, but cuts back home, as the Defence Secretary here says he's scrapping dozens of helicopters, drones and warships. So will cost-cutting help or hinder Britain's ability to defend itself? And will UK weaponry actually make a difference in the war? Also coming up, the US again blocks a demand at the United Nations Security Council for an unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. Inside the underground car parks of eastern Spain, the clean-up continues weeks after the deadly floods.
On the day when disaster struck these towns, the water would have cascaded in and kept filling this place until it reached the ceiling.
Plus, Muslim-American comedian Zainab Johnson on why she's optimistic for her country after Trump 2.0.
I hope that he's good. I don't have confidence in him, but I really do hope that he's good, because if he's good, then everybody benefits.
Good evening. We begin with the one demand Ukraine's President Zelensky has been making for months: permission to deploy long-range Western missiles inside Russia. America agreed, and the UK followed suit, which means we can show you these images. We can't independently verify them, but this appears to be the debris of a British-made Storm Shadow missile found today in a Russian border village. Coming so late in the war, with Ukrainian troops depleted and only 2 months before Donald Trump takes office, it's not a given that these weapons will mark a turning point. But we do know their use deep in Russian territory will further antagonise this man, Vladimir Putin, who has already upped his nuclear rhetoric. That's why the timing of UK defence cuts announced today may seem a bit off. Ageing ships, drones and helicopters will be scrapped to save £500 million over 5 years. So how worried should we be? And does this mean the UK will be less able to defend itself, just as threats from abroad are ramping up? Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, has tonight's first report.
Footage on social media purportedly captures a Ukrainian missile strike on Russian soil. Sky News has geolocated the video to the village of Marino in the Kursk region. Separate images shared online by Russian military bloggers purport to show fragments of a British-supplied cruise missile found in the same village. Sky News cannot independently verify the pictures, but they emerged as a source revealed Ukraine has fired Storm Shadow missiles for the first time inside Russia. A high-stakes move in defiance of warnings from Moscow of dire consequences. Perhaps surprising, then, for all this to happen on the same day as the UK announces cuts to its own defences.
For too long, our soldiers, sailors, aviators have been stuck with old, outdated equipment because ministers wouldn't make the difficult decommissioning decisions. As technology advances at pace, we must move faster towards the future. So today, with full backing from our service chiefs, I can confirm that 6 outdated military capabilities will be taken out of service.
But his opposite number attacked him for failing to say when defence spending will rise.
They have refused to set a pathway to 2.5%, and now we see the consequences. Cuts. Today, they're scrapping key defence capabilities and weakening our national security. Labour have made their choices. They own the consequences.
The equipment set to be axed comprises 5 warships, including 2 amphibious assault vessels used by the Royal Marines, a total of 31 helicopters, with replacements planned to fill the gap, and a fleet of expensive drones. The announcement came as the government conducts a major review of defence, one that it says will draw on lessons learnt from Russia's war in Ukraine. But one of those lessons is that old kit, no matter how dilapidated, is better than no kit, and that mass has a quality of its own. Yet holding on to ageing equipment costs money. And while military chiefs won't relish making reductions at a time of growing threats, they have little choice without a lot of extra cash. Yes, there are going to be new investments, but this round of cuts is not the last. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
So regarding Ukraine, how big a moment is this in the war? Well, earlier I spoke to our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, in Kyiv. Stuart, how significant a moment in the conflict do you think this is, and what led to this change in policy?
I think it could be pretty significant. Obviously, a lot of the details are unclear at this stage, but if you take it at the very simplest form, you would have American, British and potentially French missiles available to the Ukrainian military to fire into Russia. And bear in mind, this is something that Ukraine has been asking for a very long time. They want the ability to go for munitions depots, for supply lines, for the places that drones and missiles fired at Ukraine are launched from. So potentially it is extra to the armaments that they have already, and very significantly can attack in Russia itself. I think the discussion has been taking place, obviously, with President Biden for a very long time, and ultimately Britain had been inclined to allow long-range missiles to be used, but part of the guidance system is from the United States, and so the President was able to veto that permission until finally he decided to change his mind. And once his mind had changed, then I think it was always clear that Britain was very likely to follow suit.
And how risky is it for Britain to step in alongside an outgoing Biden administration?
Yeah, and I suppose a lot depends on what Donald Trump does when he comes into office and the position that he takes, which is incredibly unclear. And sometimes he seems very supportive of Ukraine, and sometimes he does not seem so at all. I mean, Britain has played a significant role in assisting Ukraine from the very start. I'm not sure that this makes it any more dangerous for the UK than it was beforehand, because we have been at the front, in fact, probably right at the front for a long period of this conflict in supporting this country. So this will be something that our defence chiefs and the Prime Minister will have been weighing up. I suspect that they've concluded it makes not much difference one way or the other. The rhetoric from Russia is always going to be the same.
And is there a heightened sense of danger? I'm talking about the temporary closure of the US Embassy in Kyiv.
Yeah, we don't know where their information came from, but I can assure you when it was announced, there were a lot of worried people here. You know, what did they know? Was there going to be a strike at any moment? I think we've had one, maybe two air raid sirens today, so people are concerned. But it's really interesting here, Gillian, how quickly, even when those sirens have gone and they've gone quiet, people are back out on the streets. Sometimes they never actually go underground and keep off the streets anyway, and life carries on very normally. People go to work, shops are open, cars are on the street. So this has gone on for a really long time now. People have got used to it. Certainly, things like embassies closing does worry people. There's no doubt about that.
Stuart, thank you. Stuart earlier there. Well, meanwhile, the United States today announced it was lifting restrictions on more of the weapons it provides to Ukraine. American-supplied anti-personnel landmines can now be used by the Ukrainians to slow down Russia's progress on the battlefield. Here's our US correspondent, Mark Stone, on the latest policy shift for the outgoing government.
In the Ukrainian capital, there is a deceptive normality. The hubbub masks the tension. The latest warnings overnight of a significant air attack by Russia did not materialize. But there is a limbo here, a war still being fought on the eastern front lines, a war with an outcome unknown, because the biggest backer, America, is in a transition from Biden to Trump. President Zelensky was near those front lines this week, grateful now, he says, for America's latest, maybe last weapons package.
We have a new support package from America. It's worth $275 million. The package includes drones, ammunition for rockets and artillery, and most importantly, mines to stop Russian assaults. This will really strengthen our guys on the front line.
The mine part of this is controversial. This is a country already heavily mined, a legacy of challenges for civilians. We saw them here in 2022. Back then, this location was Ukrainian-held. Now it's in Russian hands. An illustration of a war that Ukraine is not winning. And that's precisely why the Americans say more weapons, more mines are regrettably necessary.
They have a need for things that can help slow down that effort on the part of the Russians. They're fabricating their own anti-personnel landmines right now. The landmines that we would look to provide them would be landmines that are not persistent. You know, we can control when they would self-activate, self-detonate, and that makes it far more safer eventually than the things that they are creating on their own.
For 3 years now, for 1,000 days, America has led the way in Western support for Ukraine, but Biden has been accused of drip-feeding weapons, enough to hold the line but not to win. Now, with permission to use missiles inside Russia and with the delivery of controversial mines, the White House has shifted gear. And so I think there are a number of things going on here. First of all, it is true that the Biden administration was surprised by Putin's use of North Korean soldiers. It gives the whole conflict a more global feel. But beyond that, this is about Donald Trump. President Biden does not know quite what Trump's peace plan for Ukraine would look like, how much it would benefit the Russians. And so right now he is doing all he can to put the Ukrainians in the strongest possible position. There is, of course, only ever one president at a time, but as they prepare for the inauguration in January, it does feel a little like there are two presidencies in parallel right now. Ukraine is trying to appeal to both. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
So how might the change of heart by the United Kingdom and the United States impact the war? Our military analyst, Sean Bell, has been looking at the capability of Storm Shadow missiles.
Storm Shadow is a legacy long-range weapons that's been in the UK service for many years, in fact 30 years. 155 miles, picture of it here, subsonic. It's a precision strike weapon, ideally suited for taking out headquarters, logistics supply, energy infrastructure. And Ukraine's been using this weapon very successfully for well over a year. The challenge are there's very limited numbers actually left available for them to use. Now, initially, the UK provided these weapons to Ukraine with the approval to use them as long as it was within the law of armed conflict. They could use them wherever they liked. After America intervened, they then put some restrictions on. Those restrictions have now been lifted again. But the fact is that I don't expect we're going to hear Sir Keir Starmer mentioning anything about this. We can see the range of these missiles and the ATACMS here. All that's happened is that the Russians have moved their aircraft, fighter jets and transport aircraft further away out of range. That will make them safe, but also make them a lot less effective over Ukraine. But in addition to the missiles, President Biden has also agreed that the anti-personnel mines can actually be moved into Ukraine. Why has he done this now, over 1,000 days into the conflict? And anti-personnel mines are incredibly sensitive items. If we look at the Russian equivalent of the mine, the PFM-1, this is a very widely used mine, known as the green parrot or a butterfly mine. It looks massive. It's only about 5 inches long. It can be thrown out of the back of helicopters or transport aircraft. It flutters like a falling leaf to the ground, and then it's armed. Now, what should happen is after about 40 hours that it self-destructs. The trouble is it's not very reliable. Only 80% of them do that. As a result, it leaves a lot of carnage around of unexploded ordnance on the ground. To address this, what the Americans are doing, we don't know the specific item that the Americans are deploying, but the key difference is they're electrically initiated. When you look at how the Russian mines are, if you tread on them, it's a mechanical link, a bit like when you pull the trigger of a gun, it detonates the charge. For the American mine, what happens when you step on it, an electrical circuit is made and the electrical charge actually fires the charge. The beauty of that is the battery eventually discharges after about 40 hours, and after that happens, the mine left is safe. Why is that important? When we look at some of the statistics, mines leave a dreadful legacy on the battlefields. Only last year, look at the numbers, nearly 6,000 people were injured. There were nearly 2,000 deaths, nearly all of those civilians. And look at that, 37% of them were children. So where and when are these mines going to be used? Well, mines are generally used in defence rather than on attack. So where Ukraine's likely to use them, if you look at the Donbass, the big red shaded area, that's where Russia is on the advance. Ukraine is probably going to be reluctant to use those mines on Ukrainian territory. But if you look up in Kursk, that's where the Ukrainians have an incursion, up in the Kursk region, and they are feeling embattled at the moment. Now, Putin is doing everything possible in the last few weeks to try and take as much territory as possible in preparation for the 20th of January. Why is that date important? It's when the new president takes over in America, and there's the potential for negotiation. President Putin will not want any Ukrainian soldiers on his territory at that time. That's why he's thrown 50,000 of his troops, 12,000 North Korean troops in an effort to push them all out.
You're watching The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Still to come, America blocks another attempt by the United Nations Security Council to demand a ceasefire in Gaza. I'll be speaking live to the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Palestinian occupied territories and a spokesperson for the Israeli government. Do stay with us.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out. The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Welcome back. The United States has vetoed a United Nations Security Council resolution calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. 14 council members voted in favour, but the US blocked it because the release of hostages was not a precondition for a truce. Well, that comes after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a brief visit to central Gaza, where he met with troops stationed in the region. He also announced an offer of $5 million and safe passage out of Gaza to any resident who hands over an Israeli hostage.
Whoever dares to harm our hostages, we will chase you and we will get you. I also say to those who want to get out of this maze, whoever brings us a hostage will find a safe way to get out. We will also give a reward of $5 million for each hostage. Choose, the choice is yours, but the result will be the same. We'll get them all back.
Well, joining me now is Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. Thank you very much for joining us. First of all, your thoughts on Netanyahu's offer of $5 million to any Gazan who offers up an Israeli hostage, that reward being put in place today?
It sounds an insult. It sounds an insult to the families of the hostages. It sounds an insult to the right to life, both of the hostages and of the Palestinians who are trapped under constant bombing, to the Palestinians who have been killed. We are at 43,800 right now. 70% of the victims are women and children. And again, the fact that Israel, with the support of the United States, continue to put new conditions, new clauses, it's preposterous and untenable.
And what are your thoughts on the latest political development today, and that is the United States vetoing that UN resolution for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire?
I think the same. It's preposterous and untenable. Look, it's 14 months that the United States do not only support the current atrocities in Gaza militarily, financially, politically, but the way they hamper the work of the Security Council, it's an affront to the United Nations and what the Security Council stands for.
You say that the US is supporting the atrocities in Gaza. The reason for the rejection is that there wasn't an articulation of the condition that the hostages be released before any ceasefire.
Well, and this is why I say that it's preposterous, because for a long time, the United States have claimed that there was not enough emphasis on the release of the hostages. In the proposed resolution, there was reference to the release of the hostages. The point, you see, is that the atrocities in Gaza need to be stopped no matter what. The right to life of both the hostages trapped in Gaza and the Palestinians trapped in Gaza is not conditional upon anything. So the hostilities need to stop, full stop. And of course, the hostages need to return home. And so the Palestinians, the 9,000 Palestinians who are detained, most of them without charge and trial, need to return home.
You've recently returned from Gaza and described it as unfit for human life. What did you find? What did you see?
No, actually, I never set foot in Gaza as a special rapporteur in the last 2 years and a half. So my statements are given based on the evidence I collect remotely, both through direct testimonies and through the work of forensic, legal and technical experts, both on the ground and remotely.
But that is something that the EU has said, that it's unfit for human life.
It is. I mean, if you look at the satellite imagery of Gaza, if you look at figures of the destruction, both of civilian infrastructure, hospitals, the lack of homes, the lack of basic water and hygiene services, what is left of Gaza is not fit for human life. So this is a problem, a human-made disaster, human-made catastrophe, which is going to impact generations. So in the immediate, what is to be done is a ceasefire, because only the ceasefire can end the hostilities, hence the continuous death of civilians by artillery and sniper fire.
You have described the situation, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Gaza as akin to genocide.
I have. In 2 reports, I've been investigating Israel's military conduct and political decisions for 14 months now, and concluded in March this year that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israel had committed at least 3 acts of genocide: killing, infliction of severe bodily and mental harm to Palestinians in Gaza, and creations of conditions of life leading to the destruction of the people, with the intent, with the determination to destroy. And in my second assessment, I provided further context, imploring the international community to look at the overall conduct, at the totality of conduct and crime against the totality of the Palestinians in Gaza, in the totality of the land. Because while the attack on Gaza is wild and brutal, the fate of the Palestinians in the West Bank is nothing really better.
But the president of the ICJ, at the time of their ruling, has said that the court decided that the Palestinians had a plausible right to be protected from genocide and that South Africa had the right to present that claim in the court. It did not decide that the claim of genocide was plausible.
No, it did not, because in 15 days, the court didn't have the time to look at the merits. However, over 3 separate occasions, in January, in March, and in May, the court has issued provisional measures that are binding, both for Israel and member states. And if observed, they would have led to the end of the hostilities, as it was even proclaimed in May. And also in February, in another case for genocide initiated by Nicaragua versus Germany, the court reminded member states of their obligation to stop the transfer of arms, of weapons, to a state which might plausibly commit genocide. Therefore, member states who have not complied with this provisional measure are in serious breach of international law and the Genocide Convention.
But you would agree that determining genocide is complex, intent has to be demonstrated. And I have to put it to you that there have been several allegations accusing you of anti-Semitism. The US Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, has said that you're unfit for your role and that the United Nations should not tolerate anti-Semitism from a UN-affiliated official hired to promote human rights. What's your response to that?
That I expect no less from the government of a state which is complicit with the crimes that Israel is committing. But the point is that my assessment is not an isolated one. There are 30 independent experts who have joined this assessment. There are Israeli genocide scholars, other genocide scholars, including the leading expert on genocide among lawyers, William Shabbas. There is an increasing consensus, let alone among certain member states, that what is going on is genocide. But let me say something. What the court has decided in January this year, without even getting into the merit, the mere plausibility that acts of genocide were being committed is enough to trigger the responsibility of member states to prevent genocide. So the point is, what have member states done to comply with the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice, and specifically with the obligation not to transfer weapons? This is what we have to talk about.
We're running out of time, but I just wanted to ask you what you think the effect of a forthcoming Trump presidency will have on the trajectory of the war.
It doesn't look good, looking at the statements of the appointees for various governmental functions. It doesn't look good at all. But these, I hope, will trigger a sense of humanity and reason and respect for international law and multilateralism in the other members. Among the other members of the United Nations. There are 193 states, and they need to act promptly in order to restore international law, because this is the only way to pave the way forward for sustainable peace for both Israelis and Palestinians.
Francesca Albanese, thank you very much, UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories. Thank you. Well, joining me now is the Israeli government spokesperson, David Mencer. Thank you for speaking to us. You will have heard that interview with Francesca Albanese there describing Gaza as being unfit for human life. Is she incorrect?
So thank you for having me on, Gillian. Look, firstly, Francesca Albanese has a record as long as your arm, Gillian, as you pointed out, on Jew hatred. And what you heard tonight from her was the latest example, a sophisticated Jew hater, I would call her, but a Jew hater nonetheless. Danny Danon, our UN ambassador, has called for her resignation. Our ambassador has called for her resignation because of propagating baseless accusations. He called her one of the most anti-Semitic figures in modern history, particularly on this false claim of genocide. You correctly identified Linda Thomas Greenfield, the US ambassador. She said that she was unfit for the role. The governments of France and Germany have both condemned Albanese. Even France called her scandalous. Germany called her appalling. She's even accused David Lammy, your own David Lammy, of being a genocide supporter. And also in the Congress in the US, both sides of the House have cancelled their visit to Congress. Why? Because she is constantly accusing Israel of genocide, which actually weaponizes the Holocaust terminology. It equates Jews with the victims of genocide with their perpetrators. This is a moral inversion. It perpetuates anti-Semitic tropes, calling Jews as oppressors, committing the very crimes once inflicted on us.
If we move away from the claim of genocide, on the question of Gaza being unfit for human life, what is your comment to that?
Well, I'll tell you what my comments are very, very clearly. This was a war which was perpetrated upon us. It was Hamas which instigated this war. When they set out on their journey to massacre Jews, the worst day of Jew killing in history since the Holocaust, they knew what they were doing. They knew that it would elicit a response. And what they did was a double war crime. They hid themselves amongst civilians. They still do. And they fire at us from those civilian places, at our civilians. So it's a double war crime. And that's why it is Hamas that is responsible for this war. And Israel has a very clear objective to ensure that we get our hostages home, 101 of them, still being held by Hamas. Some of them are dead, unfortunately, but many are still alive. And you repeated the Prime Minister's plea there that, you know, to Hamas, if any Hamas are watching right now, let our hostages go, surrender, and firstly, you'll be allowed to leave with your family, but also you'll get $5 million. But ultimately, if Hamas surrender, this war is over right now. I never heard once from Francesca Albanese a call for Hamas to surrender. That would be the decent thing to do.
David Mencer, I'm going to ask you directly if you believe that Gaza is fit for human life in the state that it is in now. Is it fit for human life?
The only way it is unfit for human life is what Hamas have done to it. Hamas could look like Monaco right now. It could look like Singapore without the amount of international money which has been poured into it. Unfortunately, that money has been sunk into the terrorist network, to underground tunnels, to ways to fight Israel, to destroy Israel. That is the definition, the dictionary definition of genocide. They wish to wipe us off the face of the earth. Iran are their backers. And of course, they've tried to do it, and if they were given the chance, they'd get the chance. They would try to do it again. The people responsible for the war in Gaza are Hamas. We've taken them apart. There's about 24 battalions. We've shattered about 23 of them. The remnants have regrouped in the north. We're taking them apart as well. But ultimately, Gazans are not going anywhere, and nor are Israel. So ultimately, Gazans will be able to live there in peace, but only with a leadership that wants to build their own future rather than to destroy my country.
And is the bombardment of northern Gaza, is that proportionate?
So there's no bombardment of northern Gaza. There is an effort to get civilians out of harm's way. That's precisely what we've done. We warn civilians in advance of our military action. No one says it's pleasant for civilians to have to move again, but Hamas are trying to get them to stay. And we're going after the Hamas terrorists in a targeted way. Now, again, this was not a war we wanted, but this is the way Hamas wanted to fight us. So every single casualty, civilian or otherwise, civilian deaths are a catastrophe, but every single casualty must fall at the feet squarely of Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organisation.
I want to ask you, though, is there any safe place within Gaza? Is there any safe place for people to go?
Yes, there is. The Al-Mawasi safe humanitarian zone has been designated by the Israeli army as the place for civilians to go to. Again, no one says this is a pleasant experience, but we've got to do a job to defeat Hamas, to free Gazans from Hamas. When Gazans go to those humanitarian zones, they'll be able to get shelter, water, food, medical attention. Again, it's not a pleasant situation, but Hamas initiated this war. We're defeating Hamas, and then Gazans will be able to go home to build a better future for their kids, not with a mind to destroy this country.
Just want to talk about the humanitarian aid, and the UN are warning that the amount of aid getting into Gaza is at its lowest level in a year, and that it can't distribute aid if Israel's military operations mean it's too dangerous. They can't get the aid to the people who need it.
So, unfortunately, that's just an excuse, because the IPC, part of the UN, have always been wrong when it comes to the aid going into Gaza. There's over 1 million tons of aid which has gone into Gaza. It's 80% more food which has gone into Gaza than before this war. What we saw over the last 24 hours was Hamas and criminals looting the aid, looting it from UNRWA's trucks. UNRWA used to give it to Hamas. Now Hamas are looting it from the UNRWA trucks. But we are pushing more aid in there every day. And the Israeli government has made this absolutely clear. If international donor countries wish to send aid in, we will get it in. Right now, Gillian, you should know there are around 900 trucks worth of aid inside Gaza. They've been through the Israeli security check, but it's the inefficiency of the United Nations, once again, who are unable to get it about.
Just want to quickly come back on that. We are running out of time, but the UN Aid Coordination Office has said that in the last 2 days alone, 6 attempts to deliver life-saving assistance to besieged areas in the north of Gaza were completely blocked.
So that is incorrect again. I can tell you the facts. The facts don't lie. These aren't opinions. 50 trucks of aid went in today into northern Gaza. I spoke about it today at our daily press conference. 50 of those trucks went in. We're pushing that aid in, particularly to northern Gaza, because Hamas are keeping some of those civilians as a human shield inside northern Gaza. We've asked them to leave, but Hamas are stopping them. So we're getting the aid to them while at the same time fighting Hamas. But we're close. The Prime Minister's talked about this being the beginning of the end of Hamas. We want a future without Hamas, which is a better future for Gazans and ultimately for Israelis as well.
David Mencer, thank you very much for speaking to us, Israeli government
spokesperson. Good to be with you. Thank you very much,
Gillian. Thank you. Well, next, to the uncertain fate of the man Donald Trump wants to be his Attorney General. Matt Gaetz, today, the US House Ethics Committee has been discussing whether or not to share the findings of its investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct. Well, our US correspondent James Matthews joins me now from Washington. James, he's a controversial pick for Attorney General and so has been on a charm offensive today. But this report, if released, could it undermine his chances?
I think it would go a long way to doing so, Gillian. Yeah, this Ethics Committee, they're looking into allegations of sexual misconduct. It would matter no matter, who the subject is. It certainly does matter more because Gaetz is Donald Trump's pick to be Attorney General, of course. He's a man with a murky past. Accusations against him include that he had sex with an underage girl, 17 years old at the time. Gaetz denies it. The Department of Justice, they didn't press charges, but the notion that he should be given the top job in law enforcement has promoted an outcry for many. Gates is a man who's made enemies among colleagues and opponents. That's a problem for him because he's going to have to be confirmed by the Senate early next year if he is to fill that position. The House Ethics Committee has pulled together a report into the allegations, has taken witness evidence from the girl in question and others. So they've pulled together the kind of detail that would inform the choice of senators on Gates. They haven't reached agreement today in a meeting on whether or not they would publish this report. Let's listen to Susan Wild, the top Democrat on the committee, talking about their conclusions today.
We had agreed that we were not going to discuss what had transpired at the meeting, but it has come to my attention that the chairman has since betrayed the process by disclosing our deliberations within moments after walking out of the committee. And he has implied that there was an agreement of the committee not to disclose the report. That is an untrue, to the extent that that suggests that the committee was in agreement or that we had a consensus on that, that is inaccurate.
That committee has also been looking at other allegations, illicit drug use, accepting bribes and so on, and seeking to obstruct investigations into his conduct. So taken together as a body of evidence, it could seriously undermine the career ambitions of Matt Gates. It's why we've seen the charm offensive on Capitol Hill today. Gates has been sitting down with senators accompanied by the Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, trying to win them over. I spoke to some. It's clear that some of them are happy and convinced that they will back him. Others remain to be convinced. It's important because the appointment, the confirmation of Gates would reflect the control that Donald Trump has over his government and its members and the extent to which they will implement his agenda.
James, thank you. 3 weeks have passed since floods devastated parts of Valencia, and yet the clean-up operation goes on, with people still picking up the pieces after losing their homes and belongings. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons sent us this report from Valencia.
In Paiporta, you can wash away the mud, but the horrific memories are embedded into the very fabric of this town. Dozens died when floodwater ripped through here. Among them, Juan's father, Enrique. Enrique drowned in an underground car park. By the time Juan arrived, the water had engulfed everything, including his own hope.
And when I arrived walking, I could to see the disaster. I could to see the water inside the parking, and there was very noise, and I said, Enrique, Papa, Enrique, and calm. I think no. I be sure that it was impossible to do anything.
In Catarroja, another of the town's most grievously hit, they are still clearing out these underground car parks. We're invited inside. The people working down here say it is grueling and mentally exhausting. The floor slick with mud and floodwater. One of these underground car parks, you can suddenly imagine just how hellish they would have been on the day of the flood. Because even after 3 weeks of a clear-up operation, it's still full of mud. There's still abandoned cars here. But on the day when disaster struck these towns, the water would have cascaded in and kept filling this place until it reached the ceiling. The people working here are volunteers. These towns are still having to help themselves. A fortnight ago, we met Cristina in Paiporta, surrounded by chaos and feeling forgotten by her own government. Since then, the military have arrived to help clear up a belated show of support.
We are still angry because we now see how they can help us. We see the army now, we are organized and everything is improving, but we lost a lot of days in the beginning.
The suffering of this region is a story of fragility, of modern towns destroyed by the whims of weather, of leaders who didn't lead and victims who died a miserable, muddy death. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Paiporta.
This is The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Next up, I sit down with comedian Zainab Johnson and get all her thoughts on the reality of a Trump 2.0.
Prime Minister Modi is the most popular politician in the country. He is expected to win his third term in these elections.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party, a promise fulfilled. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
He paid over $50,000 to traffickers to get him to America. Instead, he was kidnapped, tied up, and threatened by smugglers. A commando from the state force walks me through to a Mai Tai village on the front line.
Firing the civilian and they're burning our house.
We cross to the opposite side, held by the Cookies.
When they fire, we have to retaliate.
Sky News, get the full story first. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration.
The enthusiasm is palpable. The young desire change.
These elections are a pivotal moment for the country's economic and political history. The concern here is that the public healthcare system is inadequate.
In a prayer, she's asking God to help understand what happened. I cannot carry on. God, help me. He says his world has crashed. Like him, there are scores of families searching for their loved ones.
Too often have families endured such tragedies for the negligence not only by the administration, but also by spiritual people in this country. Free wherever you get your news. Even though it has few seats in parliament, Kashmir is symbolic and very significant. It's often been called a nuclear flashpoint.
This may be the Premier League.
I'm not like everybody else.
But this duo have been in a league of their own. It's Haaland, a striker like no other.
Not like everybody else.
Son, Starman, the Tottenham Hotspur.
Like everybody else.
That's just stunning. Wow!
Everybody else. Like everybody else. Like everybody else.
Manchester City, Tottenham on NBC and Peacock.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty? I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. Here's a question for you. Where is the humour for a black Muslim woman in an America veering to the right? Well, comedian Zainab Johnson didn't vote for Donald Trump, but she's optimistic. That's born out of her instinct to make the best of any situation. And she channels that in her comedy. Have a listen.
I was a part of such a tight-knit Muslim community when I was young. I didn't really understand the separation. You know, being a black Muslim, I just thought I was Muslim. Then 9/11 happened. And I was scared to go outside after 9/11. My friend Zainab, why are you not coming outside? I'm like, because Islamophobia. Islamophobia, they hate Muslims, they hate me. She was like, girl, you black. 5 minutes later, I was like, that took a lot to do in these heels.
Well, I spent some time with Zainab while she's on tour in London and asked her what informs her stand-up material.
I'm not going to be an expert on everything that happens in the world, but I am an expert on me. And nobody is an expert on me. And so if I stay there, then I'll always be ahead in that way.
So as a black Muslim woman living in the United States, where is the humor?
I mean, here's the thing. If there's no humor, then what is there? You know? I feel like if you watch my stand-up, you can see the humor is, you know, everywhere. Like I have a knack for turning negativity into comedy, you know? I remember one of the first things that I declared proudly as a comedian was that I was a Muslim woman, and I got a lot of backlash for that, actually. I was met with a lot of comments, you're not Muslim because you don't cover your hair. And my response was, well, this is a wig, so technically. I have a way of turning things like that into comedy.
The recent phenomenon in America, obviously, has been the elections.
Yeah.
The result of which means that Donald Trump is the president-elect.
Yes.
How have you received that news?
I'm not happy with the results. I did not vote for him. I'd never vote for him. In 2016, during his first term, he put in a Muslim ban, and he was very adamant about that. And this time around, he has not illustrated anything different or better. And so it didn't inspire me to vote for him. And so I'm not happy with the results, but every single term, there will be a certain portion of society that isn't happy with the choice. And just because you're not happy with the choice does not mean that you stop living. So my job is to continue to tell my story. My job is to continue to be unapologetically me, to take up space, to provide humor for people.
Are you surprised that he won the popular vote?
I was very surprised.
And we saw his reach extended into ethnic communities, into the Latino community, into the black male population. He increased his share of the vote there.
I was really surprised by the popular vote. And I do want to point out, because I know a lot of people are leaning on, like, he got a few more of the black male vote. Like, sure, he did, but still black men were second below black women. They still overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris. And so we keep like pointing to that, and it really doesn't mean anything. We are 13% of the American population. So even if all of the black men voted for him, it still is not the majority of, you know, people. I was very surprised by the, you know, Latino vote. I was, I mean, he's actively, that is a community that he actively discriminates against, you know, overtly, actually. But I am not surprised that the message that the Democrats, led by Kamala Harris, the message that they tried to get across, I'm not surprised that maybe it didn't reach as many people as they hoped that it would. He's, in my opinion, Trump is a dumb guy, but I think there is something to making people feel like you're talking to them, even if the judgment on what you're saying isn't ideal. I think there is something in that. So yeah, there was a part of me that was very surprised, but then there was a part of me that was like, I think one of the biggest issues that we have right now is messaging, and he was able to get his message across clearer, I guess.
And do you see the world as being a positive place under a Trump presidency?
If ever a thought comes in my mind like, oh no, Trump, now is it gonna be the purge? Like I have to remember, like, no, we've persevered through much worse. So, yeah, and to be very honest with you, and I don't know if this is the optimism coming in again, but like, I hope that he's good. I don't have confidence in him, but I really do hope that he's good, because if he's good, then everybody benefits, you know? Yeah, I am not the voter that's like, I hated that guy, and although he's making our society better, that's not my guy, so I don't want, no. I'd love a pleasant surprise.
Comedian Zainab Johnson there. Well, that's all for tonight's programme. Thank you for watching. News at 10 is up next with more on the use of UK-made Storm Shadow missiles to strike Russia.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.